the wild heart of Montana, where the wind carries dust and memory, a broke cowboy named Jesse Quinn took a bet no sane man would touch, to lay a hand on the killer stallion called Ghostwind. The crowd laughed, until silence fell, because that touch, rough, trembling, and true, would change not just a man, but the soul of Redwater Basin forever. The summer sun burned low over Redwater Basin, Montana, laying gold and fire across the dusty fairgrounds. The air shimmered with heat and noise, the rattle of spurs, the bark of vendors, the laughter that came too easily when whiskey loosened tongues. It was the annual Frontier Fair, when the whole basin gathered to drink, gamble, and forget the drought that had turned pastures into cracked earth. At the center of the crowd, standing atop a wagon like a preacher at a revival, was Silas Hart, owner of the biggest ranch for 100 miles and a man who enjoyed being seen. His white Stetson glowed in the light, his gold watch chain gleaming like a badge of royalty. The people of Redwater called him King Hart, and today he was in rare form. Behind him, in a heavy pen of oak and iron, pawed a creature that made the crowd take a step back every time it snorted. The stallion Ghostwind, pale as smoke, muscles rippling under a hide the color of moonlight. His eyes burned like frostbitten steel, and when he screamed, the sound didn't belong to any tame animal. He had killed 3 men, they said. 2 professional wranglers and 1 sheriff's deputy. No one had dared get within reach since. Silas lifted a silver flask and took a slow drink, letting the suspense stretch. Then, he turned toward the people with that sharp grin that never reached his eyes. "Let's make this fair more interesting," he called out, his voice booming over the murmur. "You folks love a show, don't you?" The crowd cheered, half in amusement, half in fear of missing whatever came next. Silas pointed toward the restless stallion. "That right there is Ghostwind, wildest creature this side of the Rockies. Broke every man who tried him. But," he paused, savoring the moment, "I'll give half my ranch to any soul who can walk into that pen and lay a hand on him. Just one hand." Gasps rippled through the square. A woman whispered, "He's gone mad." Another laughed nervously. The old-timers just shook their heads. Everyone knew Silas's wagers were cruel jokes meant to humiliate the desperate. A few drifters shifted closer, drawn by the glint of easy fortune. Then they saw Ghostwind rear, slam his hooves against the gate hard enough to rattle nails loose, and stepped back fast. No one dared move forward, until a quiet voice came from the edge of the crowd. "I'll do it." Every head turned. Jesse Quinn stood alone near the hitching rail, a tall, weathered man in a patched shirt and sun-bleached hat. His boots were worn thin, the leather of his belt cracked from years of use. He looked like a man the world had forgotten, and maybe he liked it that way. Silas squinted. "You?" His laughter came out sharp. "Boy, I've seen you mucking stalls behind Mason's feed barn. You can't even pay for your own fence post, and you think you can handle Ghostwind?" Jesse's voice was even, almost too calm. "You said anyone who touches him gets half your ranch. That's your word?" The crowd laughed, but Silas hesitated just long enough to show his pride had been hooked. "That's my word," he said finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you live long enough to collect it." Jesse nodded once. "Then I'll take it." The laughter died as quickly as it had started. The cowboy walked toward the pen, dust curling around his boots. He moved with a deliberate steadiness, not the swagger of a fool, but the patience of someone who'd walked through worse storms. His hand brushed the old saddle slung over his shoulder, the one he'd kept even after the drought took his land. People murmured. "He's lost his mind. He's gonna die in there." Jesse stopped a few feet from the gate. Ghostwind's eyes caught the light, pale fire in the shadow. The stallion pawed, muscles coiled like spring steel, his breath bursting from flared nostrils. The air between man and beast seemed to tighten, as if even the wind held its breath. Sheriff Calder pushed through the crowd, sweat glinting on his brow. "Quinn, don't be a damn fool. That horse ain't no test of courage. It's a death sentence." Jesse didn't look back. "Then it'll be quick." He set his saddle down in the dust, lifted his chin, and stepped through the gate. The hinges shrieked. Ghostwind froze, ears pinned flat. The fairgrounds fell silent. Even Silas's grin faltered. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the stallion screamed, a sound so raw it sent shivers down spines. He lunged, hooves pounding the earth, dust exploding like gun smoke. The crowd yelled. Women turned away. But Jesse didn't run. He didn't even raise his hands. He just stood there, eyes steady, breathing slow, until Ghostwind stopped a few feet short, snorting and tossing his head. The two locked eyes through the swirling dust, man and beast, both half wild, both carrying the kind of pain no one else could see. A murmur rippled through the crowd. For the first time, the laughter was gone. Silas shouted from behind the rail, "You think staring will save you? Touch him, boy, or get out." Jesse's lips curved slightly. "Patience, Mr. Hart," he said quietly. "Some things don't take to shouting." The stallion pawed again, uneasy. Jesse took one small step forward, then stopped. He let Ghostwind see his empty hands, hear his slow, even breath. And then, the strangest thing, the horse didn't charge. He stayed where he was, tail flicking, ears twitching in confusion. The crowd began whispering, nervous, disbelieving. Silas barked, "Enough of this circus." But the sheriff raised a hand. "Let him be." The man earned his try. For a few seconds more, time hung suspended. Then Ghostwind's muscles bunched again, and he exploded into motion, a blur of white fury. Jesse dove sideways as hooves slammed into the spot where he'd stood. He hit the dirt hard, rolled, and came up gasping. The stallion reared and crashed against the rail, sending splinters flying. Jesse wiped blood from his cheek, breathing ragged, yet his eyes stayed calm. He wasn't angry, he wasn't afraid. He was learning. He stepped backward toward the gate, never turning his back. Ghostwind's roar followed him out. The gate slammed shut. The fair erupted in noise again. Cheers, jeers, shouts. Silas's laughter cut through it all. "You lasted longer than most, Quinn. But you didn't touch him. No land for cowards." Jesse picked up his saddle, dusted it off, and looked up at the setting sun burning red behind the hills. He didn't answer. But the way he looked at that stallion, it wasn't over. The people would talk for days about the man who dared walk into the pen. What they didn't know was that Jesse had just made a silent promise to the creature that nearly killed him. He would return. And when he did, one of them, man or beast, would change forever. Redwater Basin quieted fast after the fair, like a stage after the curtains drop, and the musicians stop pretending they're happy. The banners came down. The brass band packed its dented horns. Dust rolled in slow curtains across Main Street, catching in the grates of the old boardwalk, and the whiskers of the town tomcat sleeping under Mason's feed sign. By sundown, the basin looked the way it always did, thin, thirsty, and waiting on a mercy that never seemed to come. Jesse Quinn walked past the shuttered saloon with his saddle over his shoulder, the same saddle his father had tooled by lamplight back when cattle prices still made a man stand straight. The leather had gone soft with years, the edges smoothed by hands that kept working no matter what the sky said. He paused at the public well and turned the crank. The rope groaned. 3 drops of water followed by a cough of air. He smiled at it anyway, as if old friends could still surprise each other. He cut behind the livery and crossed the coyote-worn lots toward the far edge of town, where the ground gave up on pretending and lay bare as old bone. His camp was a low, stubborn shape against the evening. Canvas patched so many times the original cloth was just a rumor, poles black from years of wind, a tin cup hanging from a nail, like a small bell. Inside, a bedroll, a coffee pot, a harmonica gone out of tune, and a folded shirt he saved for Sundays that had not come in months. He set the saddle down and sat with it like a man visiting a grave. His fingers moved over the stitching, reading the swirls like scripture. The horn was scarred from ropings long ago. The fenders cracked where the sun chewed on everything that held still too long. From the road came the steady clop of a sorrel mare and a voice with the clean edge of someone who tells the truth for a living. "You took years off this town's life today," she said. "They haven't breathed right since you stepped through that gate." Jesse looked up. The woman in the saddle wore a dark duster and a hat whose brim had seen as much weather as any man's. A doctor's bag hung from her pommel, and wire-rimmed spectacles sat on her nose like they didn't belong on anyone else. She swung down with practice and wiped dust off her cheek with a wrist she hadn't noticed was dirty. "May Davenport," she said. "Veterinarian. I've been fixing other people's mistakes since I was 18. "Jesse Quinn," he said. "I've been making my own since I was younger." She smiled, quick and warm, then let it slip away. "Why didn't you bring a rope?" "Because I didn't need one to listen," he said. May nodded once as if he'd passed a small test. "Ghostwind isn't mean," she said. "He's carrying pain like a saddle that never fit. Left shoulder. He moves to protect it and scares himself with his own motion. You saw it." "I felt it in the ground," Jesse said, "like the earth ducked with him." "You know horses," she said, pleased. "Good, because that bet was made by a man who doesn't. If you push a wound, it'll fight back like a cornered thing and teach you to hate it for defending itself." She set her bag down and crouched by his campfire ring, fingering the cold ashes. "You'll go back." Jesse shrugged. "I told him I would." "Silas Hart doesn't lose in public," she said. "He prefers to win before the game begins." He watched a hawk scribble a lone line across the last light over the basin. Sheriff Calder said the same thing, only with fewer syllables. May straightened and dusted her hands. "Then you'll need help." From the bag she drew a narrow roll of cloth tied with twine. She handed it to him. Inside were packets with labels in her precise hand. Arnica, comfrey, willow bark, a little tin of salve that smelled like camphor and rain. "For swelling," she said. "For honesty, too. It's a rare medicine around here." Jesse tucked the roll into the saddle skirts like it had always lived there. "You don't like Silas." "I don't make a habit of liking men who turn living things into theater," she said simply. A shape moved in the dimness by the road. Broad shoulders under a coat built more for swagger than weather. Sheriff Calder stepped from shadow like a patient tree. He took his hat off the way some men hold it in church. "You draw trouble real easy, Quinn," the sheriff said. "Like a magnet finds nails." Jesse stood out of respect more than fear. "Not looking for it." "Doesn't mean it won't look for you," Calder said. "Boone works for Silas. Boone carries sharp ideas in dull hands. Just know the night's got ears." May glanced toward town, then back. "I'll be at the clinic at daybreak. If you're wise, you'll come by for a lantern and a calmer that won't make the horse sloppy. If you're not wise, you'll go straight to that pen with faith and nothing else." Jesse smiled a tired smile. Most days, faith is the only thing that still fits. They left him to the dark and the company of a basin that kept its own counsel. Coyotes tuned up along the ridges, a ragged choir practicing a hymn they never finished. A breeze riffled the tent wall and played the tin cup like a chime. He brewed coffee that tasted like a memory of coffee and ate cold beans from a can while the sky burned down to coals. When the last line of pink went out, He drew the harmonica the way a man reaches for a photograph, and tried to find the old tune his mother used whenever calves came too cold into a snowstorm. The reed stuck, squealed, then gave him a single, clean, lonely note. He let it fade. The drought had taken his herd, the bank had taken his brand, and time had taken everything that requires a man to talk. What it hadn't taken was the part of him that understood the way a horse thinks at the edge of fear. There is a small door between panic and peace. You don't force it. You wait beside it with your hands unarmed until the animal chooses to open it. He lay down with the saddle for a pillow. The ground was hard, but honest. He slept in the stop-start way of men who can't trust quiet. Somewhere in the night, the wind changed. It smelled of sage crushed under a heavy hoof and a barn that remembered better years. He woke before dawn, the world still blue and undecided. Frost feathered the rim of the tin cup. His breath came out in small ghosts. He rolled his bed, packed his things with a care that looked like ritual, then slung the saddle and started toward the Hart place. Coyotes fell silent as if they didn't care for the company he kept. Redwater's houses turned their backs to him, the way towns do when they've seen too many false starts. A curtain lifted, a child's face, a hand that pulled the child back. Boots scuffed behind him. He didn't turn. The sound quit when the man decided he had other business. At May's clinic, the lamp already burned. She pressed a wick lantern into his hand and a small bottle with a cork that didn't quite match. "A drop on your sleeve only," she said. "Let him smell calm, not swallow it. And watch that left side. He'll guard it like a bad memory." He tucked both away. "You always up before the sun?" "Things that hurt don't sleep late," she said, then looked past him toward the north, where the Hart barns hunched against the horizon like stubborn cattle. "Neither do men who intend to do right." Jesse tipped his hat, and she tipped hers right back, and that was all the ceremony either of them needed. By the time he reached the Hart corrals, morning had bled into a thin silver that made every nail and knot show its age. The fairgrounds trash still tumbled in little devils, paper cones, a ribbon, a child's dropped prize feather. Ghostwind's pen stood apart from the others, a fortress of heavy posts braced with iron. The stallion moved inside it like a weather front dragging light around with him. Even at rest, he looked must. No audience this time. No jokes. No wager slinging. Only the crisp creak of wood cooling and the steady tick of a windmill refusing to give up. Jesse set his saddle where he had the day before, but he set himself differently. Shoulders loose, breath long, thoughts shortened to the size of his next step. He uncorked May's bottle and dabbed his sleeve. The sharp herbal scent rose and settled, clean, honest, not a trick. He lifted the lantern and hooded it with his palm, so it glowed like a small, patient heart. Ghostwind lifted his head, ears forward, one eye on the light, one on the man. Jesse stopped where the dust still held a memory of his body hitting ground. He waited. Let the horse breathe the man. Let the man breathe the horse. A minute. 2. The kind of time that feels too expensive in public and exactly right in private. The stallion's weight shifted, left shoulder tight, as May said. A flinch that almost happened and then didn't. Jesse lowered the lantern. He turned his body a little, softening the square that looks like challenge. He let his gaze fall not to the eyes, but to the place a horse reads, shoulders, hands, feet. Behind him, gravel ticked, a boot, another. Jesse didn't turn. He knew the sound of Silas Hart's money when it walked. Heels quick, toes arrogant. He knew the heavier drag of Boone, too, like a man who'd haul trouble to a place and swear it had followed him uninvited. Back again, Silas said, voice too smooth for morning. Some men don't learn. Some men don't teach, Jesse said, not taking his eyes off the horse. Silas laughed small. "Touch him or quit. I'm not paying you for rehearsal." "You're not paying me at all," Jesse said, and felt the stallion's breath catch the way ribbon catches wind. He shut his mouth. Let the silence be the teacher again. Ghostwind blew out a long, uncertain breath that smelled of hay and iron. He stepped one pace and the pen's shadow moved with him like a cloak slipping off a shoulder. The windmill ticked once, twice, as if counting something that could not be counted. Jesse lifted the latch. The hinge did not scream this time. He'd oiled it with bacon grease he kept for skillet bread. He opened the gate slow and wide, then stepped in, lantern low, hands empty. Ghostwind's ears cut back, then forward, then held steady like a compass finding north. Jesse took one step and stopped. One more. Stopped. The stallion's skin shivered along the ribs, nerves skittering like minnows in shallow water. Jesse murmured nothing that meant anything and everything that did, sounds that promised the absence of harm. From the fence line, a match struck. Boone's face came alive for a second in a mean sulfur light. He cupped the flame to a cigarette and, watching with that lazy half-smile, let the match fall into the straw outside the pen. A breeze went hunting along the ground. The match glowed, and Jesse, without looking away from Ghostwind, said in a voice that made even Boone hesitate, "Pick it up." Boone snorted, but his boot stamped the ember flat. Ghostwind did not bolt. He bent his neck a fraction, as if the light in Jesse's hand had thinned the dark between them to something a horse could walk through. Jesse's fingers hovered over the empty air where skin might one day invite a touch. He let them fall an inch, and then he stopped, because stopping, properly done, is the first promise a frightened creature believes. "Not today," he whispered. "Tonight." He backed out. He latched the gate. He lifted the saddle and the lamp and the smell of herbs that made promises no court would recognize. As he turned, Sheriff Calder's shadow slid long across the ground to meet his. "Night's the right time," the sheriff said, as if he'd been asked. "Noise sleeps, pride sleeps. Men like Boone get drunk and forget to aim." Jesse nodded. "I'll return," he said softly, the words landing exactly where they had been born. "And when I do," the sheriff finished for him, "one of you changes." "Maybe both," Jesse said. He walked away through a wind that smelled like old rain, and something new trying to remember its name. Behind him, Ghostwind watched with one pale eye, the lantern light catching in it the way starlight sometimes gets trapped in a water trough, small, stubborn, and not of this earth. That night, when the basin folded into itself and the windmill sang a slow metal hymn, Jesse came back with the lantern hooded and the medicine on his sleeve, and set his little camp beside the pen as if he'd been living there all his life. The moon was a pale coin, thin and sharp-edged, hanging low over the Hart Ranch. The fields were silent, except for the faint creak of old fences and the rustle of dry grass. From the big house on the hill came the muffled sound of a piano, someone playing a tune that didn't quite reach the valley, soft and fragile as dust. The rest of the property slept under a sky the color of pewter. Jesse settled near the fence, cross-legged on the cold ground, his hat tilted low against the wind. His fire was no bigger than a man's open hand, enough for warmth, not enough for notice. The lantern sat by his knee, the flame barely breathing through the hood. Beyond the fence, Ghostwind stood half in shadow, half in silver light, every line of muscle alive under his coat. The horse's ears flicked back and forth, testing every sound. When the wind carried Jesse's scent, he tossed his head, snorted once and pawed the earth. The chains of the gate rattled like a warning. Jesse didn't move. He began to hum, low and slow, a tune that wasn't quite music. The same sound his mother used to make when she brushed burrs out of a colt's mane, back before drought and debt turned kindness into luxury. The hum wasn't meant for the horse's ears. It was for the space between them, the fragile bridge where trust might one day be built. For a long while, nothing happened. The stallion paced, tail swishing, then froze again, nostrils wide. Jesse felt the night breathe around them. Two creatures, both half-starved for understanding. He reached for the saddlebag and took out the old wooden flute, its edges smooth from years of calloused fingers. He held it up to the light for a moment, remembering his father sitting on the porch, carving it during a thunderstorm. "Music's a language, son," the old man had said. "Animals don't need words. They just need truth." He lifted the flute to his lips and blew softly. The first note came rough, hollow like wind through a canyon. The second held a little shape. The third found its footing. Within minutes, a thin melody curled through the darkness, winding between the posts of the corral, rising and falling like breath. Ghostwind's head jerked up, ears stiff. The moonlight caught his eyes, two mirrors of cold fire. He pawed once, twice, then stood still. The tune changed, slower, like a lullaby learned long ago and almost forgotten. The basin listened. Somewhere beyond the barn, an owl hooted. Farther off, a coyote answered, its call thinning into the night. But inside that small circle of light and shadow, nothing dared to break the fragile rhythm between man and horse. Jesse kept playing until his lips numbed. When the last note fell, he set the flute on his knee and watched Ghostwind breathe. The stallion's chest rose and fell fast at first, then slower, as if the sound had loosened something locked tight inside him. He lowered his head a fraction, not in surrender, but in thought. Jesse whispered, "Easy, boy. I ain't here to take anything from you." Ghostwind's ears twitched at the voice, uncertain. The cowboy poured a handful of water into an old tin bowl, setting it just inside the fence line. The lantern's glow spilled over his hands, rough and scarred from work, but steady. He didn't push the bowl closer. He left it there and leaned back, giving space. The stallion's gaze flicked to the bowl, then to the man, then back again. For a moment, Jesse thought the horse might approach, but Ghostwind only shifted his weight and turned away, nostrils flaring. His hooves dug at the dirt, restless and proud. "That's all right," Jesse murmured. "We've both been through worse." He stretched out beside the fence, using the saddle as a pillow, the stars bright above him. He didn't sleep at once. His mind replayed the sound of laughter at the fair, the sharpness in Silas Hart's grin, the pity in Sheriff Calder's eyes. Every face had written him off as a fool chasing a myth. But in the quiet, he could still feel the stallion's presence, close enough that when the wind shifted, he could smell the faint heat of its hide. It wasn't comfort, not yet. But it wasn't fear either. It was recognition. A twig snapped behind him. Jesse's hand went to the revolver lying under his coat. He didn't draw, just rested his fingers on the handle. Another sound, a boot scraping wood. He rose silently, peering into the dark. A figure stood at the edge of the pen. Moonlight traced the outline of a man with a wide-brimmed hat and a bottle glinting in his hand. Boone. "You lost, Boone?" Jesse said quietly. The man laughed under his breath. "Just curious what kind of preacher sits up all night singing to a horse." "Same kind that minds his own fire," Jesse said. Boone stepped closer, the whiskey sloshing. "You think that beast is going to let you touch him? You'll be lucky if he don't tear you in half before morning. Silas says you ain't right in the head." "Silas says a lot when he's scared," Jesse answered. Boone spat into the dirt, then kicked at Jesse's small fire. Sparks scattered like fireflies. "You don't belong on this ranch," he said. "Folks like you make honest men nervous." Jesse's voice stayed even. Maybe it's not the honest men who are nervous. For a moment Boone said nothing. Then he grinned, mean and wide, and stumbled off into the dark, muttering. Jesse watched until the sound of boots faded into the wind. When he turned back, Ghostwind hadn't moved. But the horse's ears were forward now, not pinned, watching, waiting. Jesse sat down again, gathering the few sparks of fire that remained. "See that?" he told the horse. "Some folks think strength means shouting. They ain't met patience yet." He stirred the ashes until only a soft glow remained, then pulled his coat tighter and lay down again. Above him, the stars seemed closer, like a ceiling of quiet witnesses. He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in trust that the world would still be there come dawn. In the middle of the night, he woke to the sound of hooves. Not violent, not panicked, just slow, steady steps circling the pen. He lifted his head and saw Ghostwind walking the perimeter, nose to the fence, tracing Jesse's scent as if mapping it. The horse stopped near him, breathing deep, warm clouds drifting through the rails. Jesse didn't move. Ghostwind leaned forward, just enough for his muzzle to brush the air above Jesse's boot. A heartbeat later, he was gone again, melting back into the dark corner of the corral. Jesse smiled to himself, eyes heavy. "We're getting there, partner," he whispered. When the first line of dawn broke over the basin, the cowboy was already awake. He rose, dusted off his hat, and poured the leftover water into the trough. Ghostwind watched, ears flicking, body tense but quiet. Jesse met his gaze through the bars. "You and me," he said softly. "We start again tonight." He gathered his gear, shouldered the saddle, and turned toward the road as the sun climbed out of the hills. Behind him, Ghostwind let out a single low snort, a sound that might have been annoyance or acknowledgement. The wind carried it after him all the way down the trail. That single breath from Ghostwind, half warning, half promise, lingered in Jesse's ears long after the sun burned the frost off the valley grass. By mid-morning, the town was awake again. Redwater's few streets baked under the Montana sun, and dust shimmered like heat ghosts over the rooftops. Jesse stopped by the blacksmith's to trade a handful of nails for oats and left without a word when the smith asked if he'd had enough of dying yet. Word about his night by the stallion's pen had already traveled faster than smoke. Some called him brave, others stupid. Most said both. He caught their whispers as he passed, snatches of sentences broken by the squeak of doors and the clang of pans. "Didn't even bring a rope. He's trying to shame Silas Hart. Bet you $5 he doesn't last another night." He kept walking. The words couldn't hurt him more than they already had. At the end of the street, the small sign for May Davenport, DVM, swayed in the wind. The door stood open, letting the smell of hay and clean linen drift out. May was standing at the table, sleeves rolled up, binding the leg of a chestnut colt that trembled under her touch. She looked up when she heard Jesse's boots on the floorboards. "You came early," she said. "That's a good sign. Means you're still breathing." He smiled faintly. "Didn't have anything better to do." She wiped her hands on a towel, eyes narrowing. "You look like a man who didn't sleep." "I slept some," he said. "Horse did too." May paused, surprised. "Ghostwind slept?" "Maybe just rested his bones," Jesse said. He walked the pen, stayed close for a while. Something brightened in her expression. A spark of professional curiosity, maybe even hope. "That's more progress than any man's managed in a year." She gestured to a chair, poured him a cup of coffee thick enough to chew, and leaned against the table. "Tell me what you saw." Jesse described the pacing. the way Ghostwind flinched whenever his left shoulder took weight. May listened, eyes sharp, already seeing the anatomy in her mind. "That shoulder again," she murmured. "It's always the left. Could be scar tissue pulling at the muscle. You can't fix pain that deep with force." "I figured as much," Jesse said. "He guards it like something he can't forget." May nodded slowly. Sometimes an injury turns into a habit. The pain leaves, but the memory stays. If he thinks every touch will hurt, he'll fight the touch forever. Jesse stared into his coffee. "Guess we got that in common." She didn't answer, and he didn't expect her to. Silence was a language both understood. After a moment, she handed him a small jar wrapped in cloth. "Poultice," she said. "Arnica and comfrey. It'll ease the muscle if you can ever get close enough to use it." He tucked it into Chatun, his coat pocket. "Much obliged." May studied him, her gaze lingering on the scar near his temple, the way he always stood half-turned, as if the world might still take a swing at him. "Why keep at it?" she asked quietly. "You could walk away, find another ranch, another life." Jesse shook his head. "You can't walk away from something that looks at you the same way you look at yourself." The room went still. Then May said, "Be careful. Silas won't like seeing that horse calm around you." "I don't plan on doing it for him," Jesse said. When he stepped back into the sunlight, the sheriff was waiting by the hitching post, hat pulled low. Calder's voice carried the gravel of too many cigarettes and too many broken promises. "Heard you made a friend last night," he said. "Maybe," Jesse replied. "Too soon to call it that." Calder nodded toward the big ranch house on the ridge. "Silas sent Boone to town at dawn. Looks mad enough to burn the wind itself. You might want to keep a lamp burning near your bedroll tonight." "Appreciate the warning." Calder hesitated, then added, "Hart's men are getting restless. He doesn't like losing control. If he can't own a thing, he'd rather see it ruined." "I've met men like that," Jesse said. The sheriff gave a humorless smile. "Then you already know how the story usually ends." Jesse adjusted the brim of his hat and headed back toward the ranch. The sun rode higher, baking the earth until the air shimmered. He could see the heat waves rising off the corral like ghosts of all the horses that had come before. When he reached the pen, Ghostwind was there, mane tangled, coat streaked with dust. The stallion's eyes caught the light, gray and haunted, the color of far-off storms. Jesse leaned on the fence, not speaking, just watching the way the muscles rippled under the animal's skin each time he shifted weight. The limp May described was there, plain as day. Every few steps, Ghostwind dipped his left shoulder, then threw his head as if furious with his own body. Jesse winced, feeling that frustration in his own bones. He set the lantern down, unlatched the gate halfway, and stood in the opening, not inside, not out. The stallion snorted, tail lashing, but didn't charge. "Easy," Jesse whispered. "Just me again." He took a step closer, keeping low, eyes soft, hands visible. Ghostwind's nostrils flared, drinking in the scent of herbs from the jar. He sidestepped, pawed, then stilled. "You hurt, don't you?" Jesse said softly. "That's no madness. It's just a scar that never healed right." The horse's ears flicked toward him. For a long moment, the two just breathed the same air. Then Jesse knelt slowly, scooping a handful of dirt and letting it run through his fingers. "See? Nothing to fear. Just dust and time." Ghostwind's tail twitched. He took one cautious step forward, then flinched hard, the shoulder giving a whist, tremor that made him rear half a foot off the ground. The sound he made wasn't rage. It was pain, sharp and sudden. Jesse froze, heart pounding. "All right," he murmured. "I see it now." He backed out of the pen, leaving the gate open just wide enough for the stallion to see him go. No challenge, no threat, only patience. That evening, the sun set red behind the hills, bleeding into the dust like old memory. May arrived at the edge of the field, her figure dark against the horizon. She handed him a fresh bandage roll and a tin cup of water. "Was I right?" she asked. "You were," he said. "That shoulder's torn bad. He's not angry, he's hurting." She sighed. "Then you'll need more time." "I got nothing else," Jesse replied. She studied him for a long beat, then smiled faintly. "Most men around here think time is something they can buy. You—" She tilted her head. "You're trying to earn it." Jesse didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the pen, where Ghostwind stood watching them from the shadows. The horse's breath fogged in the cooling air, rising like smoke over the fence rails. May followed his eyes. "You know," she said softly, "in all my years patching up animals, I've never seen one look at a man like that." "How's that?" "Like he's trying to remember you." Jesse's throat tightened. "Maybe he's trying to remember what trust feels like." The wind picked up, dry and restless, sweeping loose straw across the yard. A lantern flickered in the distance. The big house. Silas was awake, watching. May touched Jesse's arm lightly. "Don't let him see you lose heart. Men like him feed on it." He nodded. "I won't." When she left, Jesse stayed by the fence long after dark, listening to the low rhythm of the horse's breathing, the squeak of the windmill, the hush of far-off thunder rolling over the basin. He whispered to the night, "We'll fix that shoulder, you and me, one way or another." Ghostwind shifted, head turning toward the sound, ears pricked. A gust of wind swept through, and Jesse thought, just for a moment, that the stallion's eyes softened. Then lightning flashed on the horizon, white and distant. The storm was coming, and somewhere behind the lights of the ranch house, Silas Hart poured himself a drink and said to Boone, "Tomorrow, we remind that drifter whose land he's standing on." Morning came with a haze that turned the horizon to brass. The wind had shifted in the night, blowing hot and strange from the south, heavy with the smell of sage and something darker, like burned rope. Jesse woke early, sensing it before the light reached the basin. He packed his small camp neatly, set a pot of coffee to boil over a modest flame, and stared toward the big house. Silas's property stretched wide, white fences splitting the land like a map of pride. The man owned more than acres. He owned people's silence. For years, he'd paid wages late, lent money quick, and collected faster. Every barn nail and fence post within 10 miles carried some echo of his name. But not this morning. Not in this patch of dust where one poor cowboy and a wounded horse were beginning to steal his attention. By noon, wagons began to roll in from town. The wind carried the laughter of men, the high chatter of women in Sunday dresses, and the sharp neigh of horses that could feel the tension in the air. Jesse looked up from cleaning the trough to see a small crowd forming near the corral. May arrived too, frowning when she saw the gathering. "He's turning it into a show," she muttered. Silas emerged from the porch like an actor stepping on stage, his vest gleaming, hat spotless, a glass of whiskey already in hand. "Well, well," he called out, his voice slick as oil. "If it isn't the hero of last night. Folks, our man Jesse Quinn here claims he can tame the devil himself with a song and a prayer. You've all come just in time to watch him fail." The laughter that followed was mean and sharp. Jesse's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at Silas. He walked to the corral, opened the gate, and let the sound of the hinges speak for him. May whispered, "Don't let him bait you." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jesse said softly. He stepped into the pen, alone but unshaken. Ghostwind stood by the far fence, muscles quivering beneath a coat of pale dust. His mane whipped in the wind like torn silk. Jesse didn't rush. He moved the way a prayer moves, slow, deliberate, full of quiet belief. He carried only a folded cloth soaked in warm water, steam rising faintly from it. He lifted it for the crowd to see, though he didn't speak to them. Then he turned toward Ghostwind and walked forward. "Let's try again," he murmured. The horse snorted, stomping once, twice. The crowd chuckled. A boy shouted, "He'll be flat before sundown!" Jesse ignored them. He stopped a few feet away, lowered his head, and waited. Ghostwind's ears twitched toward the cloth, then flattened. Jesse let his arm drop, stepping back, not surrendering, just giving space. The stallion's breathing eased, hooves settling into stillness. May, watching from the rail, whispered to a woman. Beside her, "He's reading the horse, not forcing it. That's the only way." Silas laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Reading a horse?" he said. "You read a book, Miss Davenport. You break a horse. Always have. Always will." Jesse's voice carried over the laughter. "Maybe that's why some men never earn respect. They only rent it." The laughter died, replaced by murmurs. Silas's grin turned thin. Ghostwind shifted his weight again, eyes flicking to Jesse's face. The man raised the damp cloth, just high enough for the stallion to see it, then lowered it slowly. Step by step, he closed the gap. The air grew tighter with each inch, like the world was holding its breath. When Jesse finally lifted his arm, Ghostwind didn't rear. He flinched, trembling, but stayed grounded. Jesse stretched the cloth toward the stallion's shoulder, the steam curling in the sunlight. The horse took one deep breath and then, miraculously, let him touch. The contact was brief, a single second, but in that second, the basin went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. May pressed a hand to her mouth. Silas's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Jesse didn't celebrate. He lowered the cloth gently and stepped back. "That's enough for today," he said quietly. And then, like all fragile miracles, it broke. A rock flew from the crowd, striking the fence with a sharp crack. Ghostwind screamed and reared, hooves crashing against the rails. Jesse barely ducked in time, the air splitting beside his head. The horse bolted across the pen, panic flaring bright and wild. "Who threw that?" May shouted, fury lighting her face. But Silas just chuckled. Can't blame a horse for being what it is. Jesse stood, brushing the dust from his shirt. "No," he said, his voice even. "But you can blame the man who made it that way." He stepped to the fence, eyes locking with Silas's. For a moment, the two men stared across the corral like gunslingers. Pride against patience, power against faith. The crowd waited for Silas's reply, but he only raised his glass and forced a smirk. "You've had your fun, cowboy. Now pack your things. This ranch has no use for fairy tales." Jesse turned his back and knelt beside the trough. He dipped the cloth in water, wrung it out, and left it hanging over the rail where Ghostwind could see it. "I'll be back tonight," he said softly. Then louder, for all to hear. "Ain't no shame in kindness, Mr. Hart, even out here." A hush fell. People shifted uncomfortably. Silas barked a laugh, but it came out brittle. "Get off my land, Quinn." Jesse didn't answer. He gathered his saddle and walked past the crowd, dust clinging to his boots. The whispers followed him, some mocking, some awed. At the far edge of the yard, May caught up to him. "You didn't have to take that from him," she said. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. "Maybe not, but if I'd hit back, I'd have proved him right." Her voice softened. "You touched the horse, Jesse. Don't forget that." "I won't," he said. "Neither will he." Behind them, Silas watched from the porch, face hardening under the afternoon glare. Boone leaned in close, muttering something. Silas's reply was a low growl. If he won't quit, make him. That night, the wind returned, dragging smoke-colored clouds over the basin. Jesse's small fire flickered near the corral, the only light in the wide, lonely dark. Ghostwind paced within the pen, still restless but calmer than before. Jesse sat on his heels, watching the horse through the rails. His face was cut by shadow, but his eyes held the same steady flame as his campfire. He whispered, "They think they can break us. But they don't know pain ain't what ends a man. It's what teaches him how to stand." Somewhere far off, thunder rolled over the plains, low and distant. Ghostwind stopped pacing and turned his head toward the sound. Then he looked back at Jesse, ears flicking, breath rising like smoke in the cold night. For the first time, he didn't turn away. The stallion's gaze held steady through the thin veil of moonlight, his breath rising in slow, visible streams that mingled with the smoke from Jesse's campfire. The silence between them stretched long and deep, a kind of understanding neither man nor beast could name. Jesse felt the air shift, something fragile but real forming in that quiet space. The night was cool but restless. The wind picked up, brushing across the open fields and rattling the loose shutters on the bunkhouse. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, then another joined, their calls echoing through the valley like broken harmony. Jesse rubbed a hand over his face and exhaled, watching the sky deepen to black. He was tired, but his body wouldn't let him sleep. He could still feel the weight of Silas Hart's mockery pressing on him from earlier that day. The man's laughter, that smug certainty of power, clung like smoke. Jesse looked toward the big house. Its windows glowed faintly, golden squares in the dark. Behind one of them, he imagined Silas sitting with a drink, plotting the next cruelty that money could buy. But what Jesse didn't imagine was that, right now, that's exactly what was happening. Inside the house, Silas leaned against his desk, the amber light of a single lamp glinting off the whiskey in his glass. Boone stood by the window, watching the flicker of Jesse's campfire in the distance. "I told him to leave," Silas muttered, his voice thick with drink. "Told him to take his pity tricks and his preacher's calm somewhere else." Boone shrugged. "He ain't leaving, boss. He's out there right now, watching that horse like it's his own." Silas's jaw tightened. "It's not his. Nothing here is. Not one board, not one hoof, not one breath of air." He tossed back the rest of the whiskey, set the glass down with a hard click, and turned toward Boone. "That animal has cost me enough. The longer that drifter sticks around, the more folks start whispering that maybe Hart's got no handle on his own ranch." Boone's grin came slow and mean. "So what do you want done?" Silas stared out the window, eyes narrowing. "End it. Quietly. Make it look like an accident. The horse breaks loose, maybe runs itself into a fence, maybe a ravine. Nobody questions it. Without the horse, the story dies." Boone's teeth flashed in the lamplight. "Consider it done." Jesse sat beside the fire, rubbing the flute between his palms, the wood warm from the heat. He raised it to his lips and began to play. The melody drifted soft through the dark, a tune not meant for human ears, but for anything out there that remembered gentleness. Ghostwind's ears flicked forward at the sound. He took a step toward the fence, muscles coiling, but no longer in fear. The moon watched from above, pale and distant. Jesse's eyes began to grow heavy, the notes slowing until they faded altogether. He leaned back against his saddle and let exhaustion take him. Hours passed. Boone moved through the dark like a shadow that had learned to hate the light. He carried a knife and a coil of rope, his boots wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. The glow of Jesse's dying fire cast a faint halo around the camp, but the cowboy didn't stir. Boone smirked, stepping lightly past him, heading for the pen. Ghostwind stirred, ears twitching. His head lifted, nostrils flaring. A warning shiver rippled down his back. Boone reached the gate and knelt. The iron latch was cold under his fingers. He slipped the knife under the hemp rope that kept the hinges secured. With a few quick strokes, he began sawing through the fibers. "Easy now," Boone whispered. "You'll be free soon enough, you demon. Run wild till you break your own neck." The rope snapped softly. He worked on the second strand. Inside the pen, Ghostwind's breathing grew harsh. His body tensed, hooves shifting. Jesse, half asleep, heard the faint creak of the wood and the horse's nervous grunt. His eyes opened slowly. For a moment, he thought it was a dream, the sound of metal rasping against rope. But then he saw it. A shadow crouched at the gate. "Hey," Jesse said, his voice low but sharp. Boone froze. Jesse stood, moving fast for a man who'd just woken. "Step away from that fence." Boone straightened, knife glinting in his hand. "Go back to sleep, preacher. You don't want to get in the middle of ranch business." "This isn't business," Jesse said. "That's sabotage." The two men locked eyes across the dim yard. Boone's grin flickered, uneasy. "You think you can stop me?" Jesse took one slow step forward, his voice calm but firm. "You cut that rope, the horse bolts into the night and dies scared. That's on your conscience." Boone snorted. "Ain't got one." Before he could move again, another voice rang out behind him. "Drop it, Boone!" The metallic click of a revolver hammered the silence. Sheriff Calder stepped into the lantern's reach, his badge glinting. His hat brim cast a shadow across eyes that had seen too many bad nights like this one. Boone stiffened, the knife trembling slightly. "I said drop it." For a heartbeat, Boone hesitated. Then the knife fell into the dirt with a soft thud. Calder stepped closer, gun steady. "You're done. Go on. Tell me whose bright idea this was." Boone's lips twisted. "Ain't nobody's idea but mine." Jesse stepped beside the sheriff. "You're lying," he said quietly. "You don't risk your neck for free." Boone's jaw worked, eyes darting toward the house just for a second. But it was enough. Calder followed the glance, then holstered his weapon. "Go on back, Boone," he said coldly. "We'll talk about this in the morning." Boone backed away, his face pale under the moonlight. As his figure disappeared toward the bunkhouse, Calder turned to Jesse. "You see that?" "I saw it," Jesse said. "You gonna tell me the law's gonna do something about it?" The sheriff sighed. "The law here's got a short reach and a long memory, but I'll be watching." He walked off toward town, leaving Jesse alone again. Ghostwind was still restless, circling the pen, eyes wide and shining. Jesse approached slowly, voice soft. "Easy, boy. He's gone. You're safe." The stallion huffed, tossing his head. Jesse reached through the fence and touched the rail where the rope had been cut. The hemp was shredded, frayed ends dangling like torn skin. He felt anger rise, cold, measured, the kind that doesn't explode but hardens into resolve. "Looks like we're not just fighting pain anymore," he murmured. "Now we're fighting men." The night held its breath again. The clouds parted briefly, letting the moon flood the basin in silver light. Jesse's shadow stretched across the ground until it touched the horse's hooves. Ghostwind stepped closer, nostrils brushing the back of Jesse's hand through the rail. It was the faintest touch, but it was real. Jesse smiled, tired but certain. "Guess we're still winning." By dawn, the story had already begun to spread. Men at the saloon whispered that Boone had been caught trying to free the stallion. Women at the market shook their heads. Silas Hart must be losing his grip, they said. He can't even keep his hired men in line. Up at the big house, Silas heard the talk before breakfast. He smashed his glass against the hearth, whiskey splattering across the floorboards. "He's making a fool of me," he snarled. "That damn cowboy and that cursed horse." Boone, nursing a bruise from where Calder had dragged him by the collar, stayed silent. Silas poured another drink, his hand trembling. "If they want a show, I'll give them one. 2 weeks from now, that drifter either rides the stallion or leaves Redwater for good." The words hung heavy in the room, as if the deal had already been carved into stone. Outside, Jesse stood by the corral, unaware of the storm about to break over him. The wind carried the scent of rain. He lifted his eyes to the horizon, where thunderclouds gathered like fists. 2 weeks, he said softly. "That's time enough." Ghostwind blew out a breath, his ears flicking forward. The sky rumbled in answer. Thunder crawled across the distant peaks, heavy and slow, the kind of sound that makes the earth remember old fears. Rain had been missing from Redwater Basin for months, and now the clouds rolled in like an army returning home. Jesse stood by the corral fence, the collar of his coat turned up against the wind. Ghostwind paced inside, restless but not wild. The stallion's coat shimmered under flashes of lightning, white fire against the gathering dark. "Looks like it's just you and me tonight," Jesse said, voice half lost to the wind. He didn't plan on sleeping. Not after Silas's announcement that afternoon. 2 weeks to prove himself or leave the valley forever. The challenge had spread through town like a grass fire. Every saloon, every kitchen table, every porch had the same question whispered into the wind. Could the poor drifter really ride the devil horse? Jesse didn't care about the ranch, not anymore. He cared about Ghostwind, about the pain that lived in the animal's eyes, the same kind of ache that had followed him since the day the drought took everything he loved. He wasn't trying to win a bet. He was trying to heal something, maybe even himself. Lightning split the sky and thunder rolled closer. Ghostwind jerked his head, snorting. The smell of wet dust filled the air. Jesse grabbed his lantern and unlatched the gate, stepping inside the pen. Rain began as a whisper, then a sheet. The wind carried it sideways, turning the corral into a storm of mud and light. Jesse moved slowly, boots sinking into the ground, the lantern swinging at his side. The flame trembled, but didn't die. Ghostwind's muscles rippled, tail lashing, hooves cutting deep grooves into the wet earth. Jesse stopped a few feet away and waited. "It's all right," he said, voice low and even. "Ain't nothing here gonna hurt you." The stallion tossed his head, lightning flashing across his eyes. His breath came fast, each exhale a puff of white mist. Jesse let his hand fall to his side, showing the horse he held nothing. The wind tore across the basin, cold and sharp. The gate creaked, and the sound made Ghostwind rear slightly, his forelegs striking air. Jesse didn't move. He stood his ground, breathing slow, letting the rain soak through his hat and shirt. Minutes passed. The only sounds were rain and thunder, and the faint clink of metal on the saddle Jesse had dropped near the fence. The rhythm of the storm began to calm the stallion. His breathing slowed, his ears turned toward the man instead of the sky. Jesse took a step closer, then another. Ghostwind's hooves shifted in the mud. The distance between them was small now. Just 3 strides of open air, and everything that had ever hurt them both. Jesse lifted his arm, palm open, steady. "I know what pain feels like," he said softly. "I know what it makes you do. You fight because you remember. But I'm not the man who hurt you." The horse's ears flicked back, then forward again. Jesse waited. The rain poured harder, running in rivulets down his face. He didn't blink. He let the storm wash over them both. Ghostwind's head lowered an inch. Then another. His nostrils flared, testing the air, finding the scent of sweat and the faint herbal smell of maize salve. Lightning flashed again, and in that instant, the stallion's muzzle brushed Jesse's outstretched fingers. It wasn't a full touch, just the lightest contact. A question asked, an answer found. But to Jesse it felt like the world itself had shifted. He let his fingers rest against the wet skin, gentle and sure. Ghostwind trembled, but didn't pull away. His breath came heavy, hot against Jesse's hand. The thunder rolled, and this time the stallion didn't flinch. Jesse whispered, "There you go. That's it, partner. You're not alone anymore." For the first time, Ghostwind didn't fight the touch. He exhaled through his nostrils, the sound deep and low. A release, a surrender not born of defeat, but of trust. Jesse felt something burn behind his eyes, not from rain, but from memory. He saw flashes of his own past, the house his father built, now gone to dust. The horses he'd once trained before the drought took everything. The look in his father's eyes before sickness carried him away. Loss, anger, guilt, all of it echoed in the trembling animal before him. He placed his other hand gently on Ghostwind's neck. The muscles tensed, then softened. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been fighting ghosts, same as me." The stallion shivered once, then stillness. His head dropped until it nearly touched Jesse's chest. For a long moment they stood together in the rain, man and beast, both scarred, both finally breathing in rhythm again. A flash of lightning lit the ridge above the ranch house. Jesse caught sight of movement. A figure standing by the fence line, watching. He couldn't see the face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Silas Hart. Jesse ignored him. He wasn't doing this for Silas. When the thunder rolled again, Ghostwind didn't react. He only flicked his tail, stamping once, testing the ground beneath him. Jesse smiled faintly. "Looks like we've both decided to stay standing." He took a step back, giving the stallion space. Ghostwind's eyes followed him, calm now, the wild light replaced by something softer, something that could almost be peace. Jesse turned toward the fence, his clothes plastered to his skin, every step heavy with mud. He didn't feel the cold. He just felt alive. May was waiting near the barn, wrapped in a slicker, rain dripping from the brim of her hat. When she saw Jesse approach, her eyes widened. "You touched him," she said. Jesse nodded. "For a second, yeah, but it was enough." She shook her head in disbelief. "No one's ever done that. Not Silas, not his men, not anyone." "He's not mad," Jesse said. "Just hurt. The pain's been running the show too long." May smiled, though worry clouded her eyes. "Then you'd better be ready. Silas won't take kindly to losing his grip." Jesse glanced back toward the pen. Ghostwind stood in the rain, watching them, his body relaxed. "He already has," Jesse said quietly. The storm rolled past midnight, thunder fading into the hills. Jesse sat by the fire again, drying his hands, watching the rain ease into mist. He heard Ghostwind shift inside the pen, a quiet, steady rhythm like the sound of a heartbeat. He leaned back, letting the warmth of the flames reach his bones. "We're getting somewhere, old boy," he said under his breath. Then, from the darkness beyond the barn, another sound broke the calm, the sharp click of a gun being cocked. Jesse froze. The firelight flickered across a face just beyond the reach of its glow. Boone stood there, eyes cold and narrow. "Boss says you got 2 weeks," Boone said, "but I figure one might be enough." Jesse didn't move, didn't reach for his revolver. He met Boone's stare and said quietly, "You're a fool if you think you can scare me." Boone's mouth curved in a crooked grin. "Maybe I'm not aiming to scare you." Before he could pull the trigger, a shout rang out. "Boone!" It was Sheriff Calder, his lantern slicing through the rain. Boone turned, startled. In that instant, Ghostwind screamed, a deep, furious sound that shook the night. The sheriff's boots hit the ground running. Boone cursed and vanished into the dark, his heavy footsteps pounding toward the road. Jesse exhaled, lowering his shoulders. Calder stopped beside him, panting. "You all right?" "Better than him," Jesse said, glancing at the fence where Ghostwind now stood still again, ears high, eyes fierce. The sheriff wiped rain from his brow. "Silas won't stop, you know." "I know," Jesse said, "but neither will I." Calder studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I'll make sure you've got someone watching your back." When the sheriff left, Jesse turned toward the corral one last time. Ghostwind's gaze met his through the rails. The storm had passed, but the ground still smoked with rain. "Tomorrow," Jesse whispered, "we start again." The horse gave a single shake of his mane, as if to say he'd be waiting, and as dawn began to crawl up from the horizon, Jesse finally allowed himself to believe, maybe, just maybe, the impossible was no longer out of reach. The air that morning carried a strange calm. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the land washed clean, quiet, and heavy with promise. Puddles caught the sunrise, and the smell of wet earth clung to everything. For the first time in months, Redwater Basin glimmered under a thin mist instead of dust. Jesse poured the last of his coffee into the tin cup, took a sip, and watched Ghostwind doze in the pale light. The stallion's sides rose and fell in slow rhythm, head low, ears relaxed. It wasn't peace yet, but it was close. May arrived not long after, her boots splashing through the soft mud, her hat pulled low against the morning glare. She carried a saddlebag slung across her shoulder, the strap darkened by rain. "You look like a man who finally slept," she said. "Didn't," Jesse replied, "but I dreamed while I was awake." She smiled faintly and set the bag down on the fence post. "I brought something, liniment for the shoulder and a bit of feed mix, sweetened with molasses. Might help build trust." He eyed the jar she handed him. "Smells like trouble to me." May laughed, the sound light against the wide stillness. "To a horse, it smells like kindness. Try it when he's calm." They worked side by side in easy silence, cleaning the pen, spreading fresh straw. Ghostwind watched them with quiet curiosity. Every now and then, Jesse caught the stallion's gaze lingering, not with suspicion anymore, but with something that felt like memory. "You've made more progress than anyone thought possible," May said, leaning on the fence. "Even Calder said so. Half the town's betting you'll ride that horse by the end of next week." Jesse shook his head. "It's not about riding him." "Then what's it about?" He hesitated, then said softly, "Making him forget what fear taught him." May studied him for a long moment. "Maybe that's what you're trying to do for yourself, too." Jesse didn't answer, but she wasn't wrong. By noon, the basin's calm had shifted again. The clouds returned, thicker and darker this time, rolling low over the hills. A restless wind whipped through the trees, sending a shiver through the grass. Ghostwind grew uneasy, pacing near the far end of the corral. Jesse noticed the tension, the way the horse's ears pinned back, tail twitching. "He feels it coming," he murmured. May glanced toward the horizon. "Storm's building faster than it should. You'd best tie down your tent." He nodded, grabbing the rope to secure his gear. The air hummed with electricity. In the distance, thunder muttered, a low, rolling growl that matched the horse's unease. By late afternoon, the light turned copper and strange. The first drops fell, big and heavy, splattering against Jesse's coat. Then came the wind, sudden, violent, tearing across the open land. "Get inside!" May shouted from the barn, but Jesse was already moving toward Ghostwind's pen, The stallion reared, slamming his hooves against the fence, eyes wide with panic. The rain came in sheets now, and lightning clawed at the sky. "Easy!" Jesse yelled, pushing through the gate. Mud clung to his boots, the air thick with rain and fear. Ghostwind screamed, jerking against the rails as if the thunder itself had struck him. "Jesse, don't!" May cried. "He'll crush you!" But Jesse didn't stop. He stepped closer, hands open, voice steady even as the wind tore the words from his mouth. "You're all right, boy. I'm here." A flash of lightning split the sky, blinding white. Ghostwind bolted sideways, striking the fence. Wood splintered. Jesse ducked just in time as a rail cracked loose, grazing his shoulder. "Hey!" he shouted over the storm. "Look at me, not the sky! Look at me!" The horse turned, trembling, eyes rolling white. Jesse took another step, then another. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm. "You're not alone in it, you hear? Not anymore." The stallion's nostrils flared, breath coming fast. The rain turned the ground into a river of mud, but Jesse stood his ground. Inch by inch, the distance between them shrank. He reached up slowly, letting Ghostwind see his hand before he touched. The thunder cracked again, louder, closer. Ghostwind flinched, but didn't retreat. Jesse's hand found the stallion's neck, slick and trembling under the rain. "There you go," Jesse said softly, almost drowned by the storm. "That's it." Lightning struck the ridge behind them, close enough to make the ground shudder. The horse jumped, but Jesse held on, not with force but with steadiness. He laid his forehead against Ghostwind's wet mane, whispering words the rain carried away. For a long, wild minute, man and horse stood locked in that chaos, fear meeting patience, fury meeting faith. And then something shifted. Ghostwind's breathing slowed. The wildness in his eyes faded. He pressed his head gently against Jesse's shoulder, as if the storm outside had finally found its echo in both of them and burned itself out. When the thunder rolled away into the distance, Jesse stepped back, breathless. The stallion stayed still. May ran up, soaked to the bone. "You're insane," she said, half laughing, half crying. "But whatever you just did, it worked." Jesse brushed mud from his face. "Didn't do anything but stand there." "Sometimes that's enough," she said, placing a hand on his arm. They led Ghostwind into the barn, away from the worst of the wind. Inside, the air was warm with hay and the smell of rain-soaked wood. Jesse tied the horse gently, checked the fence, and sank onto a bale of straw, chest heaving. May knelt beside him, wrapping a dry cloth around his bleeding shoulder. "You should let me stitch that." "Later," he said. "He needs me calm." She looked at the stallion, now standing quiet in the shadows. "He's calmer than you are." Jesse chuckled weakly. "Maybe he's teaching me something." Outside, the rain softened, turning to a steady drizzle. The storm had broken, but its echo lingered in the silence that followed. Ghostwind shifted, his tail flicking gently. His head turned toward Jesse, eyes soft in the lantern light. May smiled. "He trusts you." Jesse shook his head. "Not yet, but he's starting to trust himself." They sat there until the rain stopped completely. Then May rose, wiping her hands. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you start over again." Jesse watched her walk back toward the house, her figure fading into the mist. When she was gone, he turned to Ghostwind one more time. The stallion was watching him, ears forward, breathing steady. Jesse smiled and whispered, "We survived the storm, didn't we? Both kinds." The horse gave a quiet snort, almost like an answer. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and fresh beginnings. But in the big house, Silas Hart stared out his window, watching the two figures in the barn below. His eyes burned with a fury he could no longer hide. "Enough," he growled. "Tomorrow, the whole town sees this farce end." He slammed his glass down, the whiskey splattering like blood across the papers on his desk. And in the barn, unaware of the storm yet to come, Jesse and Ghostwind stood side by side, both breathing easy for the first time in years. Morning came too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't belong on a working ranch. Even the wind held its breath. Jesse woke before dawn, the smell of hay and rain still thick in the air. He stretched, his shoulder aching where the fence rail had grazed him. The barn roof ticked softly as it dried in the early sun. Ghostwind was already awake, his pale coat glowing in the half-light. He stood near the open stall, ears flicking toward Jesse like he'd been waiting. "Morning, partner," Jesse said, voice rough with sleep. "We made it through one storm. Let's see if we can handle another." He filled the trough, checked the bandage on Ghostwind's shoulder, and then reached for the small jar May had left, the molasses mix. He scooped a handful and held it out. The stallion sniffed, snorted once, and then took the treat carefully from Jesse's palm. Jesse smiled. "That's a good sign." He didn't notice the pair of eyes watching from the shadow near the gate. Boone leaned against a post, chewing on a toothpick, face unreadable. When Ghostwind nuzzled Jesse's arm, Boone spat into the dirt. "Ain't natural," he muttered. "That beast was born mean." Behind him, Silas Hart's boots crunched across the gravel. "So fix it," he said coldly. "Today's the day we end this spectacle." Boone hesitated. "You sure, boss? The sheriff's been sniffing around since the knife thing." Silas turned on him, eyes sharp. "You afraid of a badge?" Boone straightened. "No, sir." "Good," Silas said. "Then listen close. We'll call the town out. Let them see their hero Shaw try his hand at riding that horse. And when it all goes wrong, when the animal throws him, it won't be on us. It'll just be the truth proving itself." He smiled then, thin and cold. "Make sure the crowd's there." By mid-morning, word had spread through Redwater Basin like fire on dry grass. "Hart's hosting a trial," someone said. "That drifter's gonna ride the ghost horse." Men left their work. Women packed lunches and blankets. Children ran ahead with wide eyes. By noon, nearly the whole town had gathered near the corral. The air buzzed with talk, half excitement, half dread. Jesse stood by the fence, tightening the cinch on an old saddle he'd cleaned the night before. His hat was low, the brim shadowing his eyes. May stood a few steps away, twisting her gloves in her hands. "You don't have to do this," she said. "He's baiting you." "I know," Jesse said, not looking up. "But if I walk away, that horse becomes his again, and I can't let that happen." She swallowed hard. "Then at least promise me one thing. Don't try to prove anything to them. Just talk to him the way you always do." Jesse gave a faint smile. "That's the plan." Murmur swept through the crowd as Silas appeared on the porch of the big house, coat pressed, boots shining. He lifted his hand for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying across the open yard. "You've come to see what pride and foolishness look like. This man claims to understand the beast that's nearly killed 3 men. He claims trust where others found only terror." He turned, his eyes meeting Jesse's. "Well, let's see if trust keeps him breathing." The crowd parted as Jesse walked into the pen. The dust stirred around his boots. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, but the only ones that mattered were Ghostwind's. The stallion stood in the center of the corral, head high, muscles coiled. He was beautiful in a way that made people forget fear, just for a second. His mane lifted in the breeze, catching light like fire. Jesse stopped a few feet away. He didn't carry a rope or a whip, only the saddle and his hat. "Morning, boy," he said softly. "You ready to show them?" Ghostwind snorted, stamping once. Jesse set the saddle down in the dirt, not rushing. Every move was slow, deliberate. He ran his hand along the stallion's neck, down to his shoulder. Ghostwind didn't flinch. The crowd gasped. Silas's jaw tightened. Jesse lifted the blanket and laid it gently across Ghostwind's back. The horse shifted, but didn't rear. "Good," Jesse whispered. "You're all right." Next came the saddle. The weight of it made Ghostwind tense, his muscles bunching under the leather. Jesse's voice stayed calm. "It's just me. It's just us." When he tightened the girth, the stallion blew out a sharp breath, but didn't fight. The murmurs in the crowd turned to quiet awe. May pressed her hands together, whispering something that might have been a prayer. Then Jesse slid his boot into the stirrup and, without hesitation, swung himself up. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Ghostwind exploded. The stallion reared high, front legs slashing the air. The crowd screamed and scattered back. Jesse gripped the reins, body moving with the horse instead of against him. "Easy!" he shouted. "You got this!" Ghostwind twisted, bucking hard enough to rattle the ground. Dust and sweat flew in arcs through the air. Jesse's hat flew off, landing somewhere near the fence, but his balance held, his voice steady. "It's not a fight," he yelled over the noise. "I'm not your enemy." For 10 long seconds, chaos ruled. Then, as suddenly as it began, the stallion stopped. Chest heaving, foam at his mouth, he stood trembling, but still. Jesse sat tall in the saddle, one hand on the reins, the other resting on the horse's neck. Silence swept across the yard. No one breathed. Then Ghostwind lowered his head, just slightly, but it was enough. Jesse exhaled, smiling through the dust. "That's it. We're done." The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, applause, disbelief. May covered, her mouth, tears in her eyes. The sheriff removed his hat in quiet respect, but not everyone was cheering. From the porch, Silas's face turned red. "No!" he barked. "This isn't finished. He got lucky. That animal's drugged or broken." Boone shifted uneasily beside him. "Boss, maybe let it go." "Shut up," Silas snapped. "That drifter humiliated me in front of my own town. He stopped as a shadow fell over him. Sheriff Calder stepped forward, hand resting on the butt of his gun. "You'll what, Silas? Break another man's pride because you lost yours?" The tension cracked like a whip. The crowd's cheers faded to whispers. Silas's jaw worked, but no words came. Jesse dismounted, patting Ghostwind's shoulder. The stallion stood calm now, sides rising in slow rhythm. "I didn't come here to take your ranch," Jesse said, loud enough for all to hear. "All I wanted was to show this horse wasn't the monster you made him out to be. Sometimes the only thing broken is how we look at them." The crowd stirred again, murmurs spreading like wind through grass. Silas stepped back, fury burning in his eyes, but no weapon left to use. Boone lowered his head and turned away, shame written all over his face. Jesse led Ghostwind toward the fence, the cheers swelling again, so loud this time that even the stallion flicked his ears, as if curious about the sound. May met them at the gate. Her hands shook when she reached for the reins. "You did it," she whispered. Jesse smiled faintly. "We did it." Ghostwind turned his head, brushing against Jesse's arm. The touch was light but certain, a gesture not of submission, but of choice. May looked out at the crowd still roaring, then up at the dark house on the hill. "He's not done, you know," she said quietly. "I know," Jesse replied, "but neither are we." The last of the thunderclouds drifted over the basin, their shadows long and low. The land, for once, felt like it was holding its breath, not in fear, but in hope. And standing there, hatless and covered in dust, Jesse Quinn finally looked like the thing he'd been. And standing there, Hatless and covered in dust, Jesse Quinn finally looked like the thing he'd been running from all along. A man worth believing in. The crowd's cheers still echoed through the basin, bouncing off the barn walls and drifting toward the hills like thunder that refused to fade. Ghostwind stood calm beside him, the wind tugging at his white mane. For the first time in years, the stallion wasn't a monster in the eyes of the town. He was proof. Proof that patience could tame fury, and trust could outlast pain. May came through the gate, wiping at her eyes, though she tried to hide it. "They're never going to forget this day," she said softly. Jesse looked out at the faces. Rough ranch hands, housewives, even the children perched on fence rails. He didn't see the same fear that had haunted every look before. Now he saw respect, maybe even hope. "I don't want them to remember me," Jesse said. "I want them to remember him." May smiled faintly. "Then you'd better stay close. They'll come looking for both of you." But as the last of the applause died and folks began to wander back to their wagons, one man remained still on the porch of the big house. Silas Hart hadn't moved since Ghostwind's calm surrender. His fingers gripped the railing so tight the veins stood out white against his skin. Boone lingered a few steps behind, head bowed, waiting for his master's orders. When Jesse met Silas's gaze across the distance, the air between them seemed to tighten. May followed his eyes. "He's not letting this go." "No," Jesse murmured. "He's not." That evening, as the basin fell quiet again, Jesse brushed down Ghostwind in the soft glow of the barn lantern. The horse leaned into his touch, eyes half closed. Each stroke seemed to wash away another layer of the life he'd lived before. The cruelty, the fear, the chains of rage. "You did good today," Jesse whispered. "Better than I deserved." Ghostwind blew out a breath, warm against Jesse's sleeve. Outside, the night was heavy with heat. The sky glowed faintly red beyond the ridge, not from sunset, but from lanterns burning up at Hart House. A storm of a different kind was brewing there. Inside the mansion, Silas paced like a caged wolf. His whiskey glass sat untouched. Boone stood near the door, hat in hand. "Half the valley was there," Silas spat. "They saw him ride. They saw him make a fool of me in front of my own people." Boone didn't answer. "I gave that man a place to sleep, and now they treat him like he's the master of Hart Range." "He didn't say that, boss. Folks just—" "Shut up!" Silas roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. The glass toppled, shattering on the floor. "You think I'm gonna let some penniless drifter rewrite who I am?" Boone swallowed hard. "What do you want me to do?" Silas turned toward the window, watching the flicker of tivsum, light from Jesse's camp far below. "We end it tonight," he said. "That horse doesn't live to see another dawn." Boone hesitated. "You sure you want blood on your hands again?" Silas's eyes flared. "That beast already has blood on mine. What's one more drop?" Boone nodded once, though his stomach twisted. "I'll take care of it." Down at the barn, Jesse had just finished stacking hay when he noticed Ghostwind growing uneasy again. The stallion's ears twitched, eyes darting toward the open field. "What is it?" Jesse asked, stepping closer. Ghostwind stamped once, snorted, and tossed his head. The wind had died, but a strange tension rode the air. Jesse felt it too, the kind that makes the back of a man's neck prickle before trouble shows itself. He blew out the lantern, letting the barn fall into darkness. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Only the soft creak of wood and the slow rhythm of Ghostwind's breathing filled the silence. Then came the sound, distant but clear, of boots on gravel. Jesse's hand went to the old rifle leaning by the wall. He didn't move until the footsteps drew close. Boone's voice came from outside, low and sharp. "Easy, boy. No need to wake him. This'll be quick." Jesse stepped from the shadows, rifle in hand. "Evening, Boone." The hired gun froze. "You got sharp ears for a tired man." "I sleep light," Jesse said. "Guess it's the company." Boone cursed under his breath. "You shouldn't have come here, Quinn. Ain't no fixing what you broke today." Jesse kept the barrel low, not threatening, just present. "You don't have to do this." Boone's face twisted. "You don't know Silas. If I don't, he'll find another way. And next time it'll be you, not the horse." "Then walk away," Jesse said. "Right now. No one has to know." Boone's hand hovered near his hip, but his eyes betrayed him. Tired. Defeated. "You think a man like me gets to walk away?" Boone asked quietly. "You think we get redemption out here?" Jesse took a step closer. "I think you get to choose what kind of man you are before you go to hell." The words hit harder than the rifle could have. Boone's jaw worked. His hand fell from his gun. He backed up a step, then another. "You're a damn fool, Quinn. Hart's not done. He'll burn this valley to prove he still owns it." "Then I'll be waiting," Jesse said. Boone hesitated a moment longer, then turned and vanished into the night. Jesse stood still, listening to the wind. He didn't notice May until she stepped into the lamplight from the barn door. Her shawl was clutched tight around her shoulders. "I heard voices," she said. "You all right?" "Fine," he said, lowering the rifle. "But it's starting again." She glanced toward the ridge. "He won't stop until one of you breaks." Jesse looked back at Ghostwind, who was watching them both, his breath calm again. "Then it won't be us," Jesse said. The next morning, Sheriff Calder rode up just after sunrise. He dismounted slowly, dust rising around his boots. "Boone came to me last night," he said. "Told me what Silas planned." "Did he leave town?" Jesse asked. Calder nodded. "Heading north. Said he was done working for devils." Jesse smiled faintly. "Guess the world can surprise you sometimes." The sheriff's face grew serious. "But Hart's not finished. He's calling for another bet. Says if you really tamed that horse, you can prove it in front of everyone again. This time for ownership of the ranch itself." May's eyes widened. "He's lost his mind." Jesse didn't answer right away. He ran his hand along Ghostwind's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the skin. "He's desperate," he said finally. "And desperate men dig their own graves." Calder exhaled. "You sure you want to give him another chance to bury you with him?" Jesse looked out at the rising sun, his expression calm. "No, Sheriff. I'm giving him a chance to watch me live." By midday, the word was out again. The second challenge would happen at dusk, right there on the same dirt where Silas's pride had fallen the first time. Folks came in droves, some for justice, some for spectacle. As Jesse tightened the saddle once more, May approached with trembling hands. "Please be careful. If something happens," he smiled gently. "You said it yourself, May. They'll never forget this day. Might as well make sure it ends right." Ghostwind pawed the ground, sensing the tension. Jesse rested a steady hand on his shoulder. "Let's finish this, partner." The crowd's murmur swelled as Silas stepped forward, face drawn tight with rage. "You got lucky once, Quinn," he sneered, "but no trick of patience will save you now." Jesse mounted without a word. Ghostwind stood tall under him, calm as stone. The hush that fell over the basin felt sacred. When the gate opened, the horse surged forward, not in panic, but power. The two moved together like wind and shadow, a dance born of trust. The crowd gasped as Ghostwind lifted into a gallop, his mane flying, his stride perfect. May whispered, "He's free." But in Silas Hart's eyes, freedom looked like loss, and that he could never forgive. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the man who once owned the valley stood small against the horizon, while the drifter he'd mocked rode beneath a sky burning gold. And for the first time, everyone in Redwater Basin could see it clearly. Ownership wasn't written in deeds or fences. It was earned in trust. The cheers rose like wind through the valley, fierce and unbridled. Jesse sat tall in the saddle, Ghostwind still beneath him, both of them breathing as one. The crowd pressed closer to the rails, hats in the air, faces shining with something Redwater hadn't seen in years: belief. May stood at the front, her hands trembling around the hem of her shawl. Sheriff Calder tipped his hat low, a small smile cutting through his usual grit. Even old Doc Harlan, who'd long since stopped showing up for ranch squabbles, was there, wiping his spectacles with the edge of his sleeve. But higher up, near the house where power used to live, Silas Hart stood motionless. The light caught the side of his face, making his eyes look hollow, his lips pale. Boone's words from the night before echoed in his mind. "You can't own everything, boss." Now, watching the drifter he'd once mocked ride across his land as if born to it, something inside Silas twisted and broke. Jesse dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the dirt. He patted Ghostwind's neck, whispering low. The stallion's head dropped, calm, proud, shining with sweat and dust. When Jesse looked up again, Silas was already walking down from the porch. The crowd quieted, the cheers dying into murmurs. "Here it comes," May whispered. Silas's boots left deep prints in the dirt as he crossed the yard. His fine coat was dark with sweat, his hair uncombed, his pride bleeding out with every step. When he stopped in front of Jesse, the two men stared at each other, one covered in dust, the other in wealth that suddenly looked worthless. "This was never your fight," Jesse said quietly. Silas's jaw worked. "You think this land is yours because a mob cheered?" "I think this land belongs to whoever treats it right," Jesse replied. "You stopped doing that a long time ago." The crowd rustled, whispering. Calder stepped forward a little, ready if tempers broke. Silas's voice dropped low, almost a growl. "That horse. He was mine. I bought him, fed him, broke men trying to tame him. You think one ride changes that?" Jesse looked at Ghostwind. The stallion had turned toward Silas, ears back but not afraid. His breathing was steady, his eyes alert. "No," Jesse said. "The ride didn't change him. Kindness did. Maybe it could have changed you too." The words hit like a slap, but there was no cruelty in Jesse's tone, just truth. Silas stepped closer. "You don't belong here. You never did." "Neither did you," Jesse said softly. For a long heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Silas's hand twitched toward his belt. Calder was already there, his voice sharp. "Don't, Silas!" The warning hung heavy in the air. Silas froze, eyes burning, his pride caught between fury and despair. Then, with a sound somewhere between a growl and a sigh, he turned away. He walked back toward the house, shoulders bent, boots dragging through the dust. When he reached the porch, he didn't stop. He went inside and slammed the door so hard the glass panes rattled. The people of Redwater let out the breath they'd been holding. May came to Jesse's side, tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. "It's over," she whispered. Jesse looked toward the house. Not yet. Night fell quick that day. The basin glowed with lanterns and bonfires as the people celebrated, laughter spilling into the air like the first rain after drought. But up at Hart House, no lights burned. Jesse stayed by the barn, brushing Ghostwind under the glow of one hanging lamp. The stallion leaned into him, soft and quiet, as though they both knew peace never came without a price. May joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You'll catch cold out here." "Been through worse," he said, accepting the cup. They sat on overturned crates, watching the stars come out over the ridge. "What'll you do now?" she asked. Jesse sipped the bitter coffee. "Rebuild, maybe. Fix what's broken. Make this place mean something again." May smiled faintly. "Sounds like a lot of work." Jesse chuckled. "Good thing I've got a stubborn horse and a doctor who won't stop bossing me around." Her laughter was quiet, tired, but it stayed in the air a long time. Then came the sound neither of them wanted to hear, the crack of gunfire. One shot, then another. They froze. "From the house, Vitul," May said, standing. Jesse was already moving. "Stay here." He ran up the hill, boots pounding against the dry earth. The front door was ajar, wind moaning through the hallway. He stepped inside, rifle ready. The grand room was dim, the fire dead in the hearth. On the floor near the desk, Silas Hart sat slumped in a chair, a bottle spilled beside him. His pistol lay on the rug. For a moment, Jesse thought the man was dead, until he heard the faint, rasping breath. Silas's eyes opened slowly. "Guess you came to see me fall," he muttered. Jesse lowered the rifle. "I came to make sure no one else does." Silas laughed weakly, the sound dry and cracked. "You won, Quinn. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I didn't win anything," Jesse said. "You lost yourself long before I showed up." Silas's eyes flicked toward the window, where the ranch stretched under starlight. "This land, I thought if I kept it, I'd keep who I was. But it just kept me." He coughed, his voice growing thin. "You take it. The papers, top drawer. Let it mean something again." Jesse hesitated. "You can still fix it, Silas." Silas's gaze met his, and for the first time there was no hate, only exhaustion. "No, boy. Some fences can't be mended." His eyes drifted closed, his breath shallow. Jesse stood there a long while, the sound of the wind filling the empty house. By dawn, word had spread. Silas Hart was gone. Boone never came back. The townsfolk gathered near the hill, hats in hand, as Calder spoke the final words. There was no sermon, no eulogy, just silence. When the sheriff finished, he nodded to Jesse. Jesse stepped forward, holding a small handful of dust. He let it fall onto the grave, the wind carrying it east across the basin. "You were a hard man," he said quietly. "Maybe too hard for your own good, but I'll keep my word. This land'll live again." May stood beside him, her hand brushing his arm. "He was wrong about you," she said. "Maybe," Jesse replied, "but I think he was just wrong about what owning something means." Ghostwind nickered softly from where he waited near the fence, the sound echoing across the hills. That evening, Jesse climbed the ridge above the ranch. From there, the land spread out beneath him, rolling pasture, scarred fence lines, the slow gleam of the river beyond. Ghostwind followed, his hooves whispering against the grass. "You think it's worth saving?" Jesse asked. The stallion snorted, tail flicking. Jesse smiled. "Yeah, me too." He sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the basin in gold and red. For the first time since arriving in Redwater, he didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like part of the land, worn, scarred, but still standing. May's voice carried from below. "Supper's ready, Jesse. Come on down before it gets cold." He rose, patting Ghostwind's neck. "Come on, boy. Looks like we've got a new life to build." Together they walked down the ridge, the last light fading behind them, And for the people of Redwater Basin, that night marked the end of one story and the quiet beginning of another. Weeks passed. The ranch once known as Heart Range began to change, not through money or power, but through care. Fences were mended, wells were cleaned. The barns, long neglected, echoed again with the sound of work, hammers, laughter, the shuffle of hooves on fresh straw. Jesse refused to rename the place after himself. "Names don't fix what's broken," he told May, "but hard work might." So it stayed Heart Range, though everyone knew it was something else now, something truer. Ghostwind became the ranch's living spirit. The stallion roamed freely through the fields, never straying far, never chained again. Children from the valley came to watch him, whispering stories about the horse that tamed a man's pride and saved a drifter's soul. Jesse would laugh and tell them, "He's just a horse who finally got a fair chance." But in quiet moments, he'd look at Ghostwind and know that wasn't the whole truth. The horse had changed him. And, in ways small but steady, Jesse had changed the valley. It was late summer when the first new faces began arriving. Drifters, ranch hands without pay, widows and sons from the northern ranges who'd lost their herds to drought. They came hungry, proud, and uncertain, men and women like Jesse had once been. May found him one morning fixing the corral gate, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "You can't keep feeding everyone who walks up that road," she said, though her tone held more worry than scolding. "I'm not feeding them," Jesse said. "I'm giving them work. This place is too big for one man anyway." Still, May sighed, watching him drive a nail straight with one swing. "You sure you're not building something you can't carry?" Jesse smiled faintly. "If it's worth carrying, I won't have to do it alone." That afternoon, he rode out to the pasture with Ghostwind trailing behind. The sky stretched wide, blue and endless. Prairie grass swayed in the breeze like the slow breathing of the earth. In that moment, the land didn't feel like property. It felt like forgiveness. By autumn, the basin had transformed. Crops grew again in fields that once cracked under the sun. The old mill ran at dawn, powered by hands that had once been idle. Children went to lessons May started in the old bunkhouse, using books Jesse bought with the first profits from the ranch. Every evening the same pattern repeated, the light softening, the air cooling, and Jesse standing at the fence with Ghostwind beside him, watching the sun fall behind the ridge. Sometimes the sheriff rode by and joined him for coffee. "You ever think about leaving?" Calder asked one night, blowing on his cup. Jesse smiled. "I did, but then I realized leaving would mean giving up on the one thing that finally made sense. Which is, belonging somewhere without owning it." Calder grunted, half amused, half impressed. "You talk like a preacher sometimes." Jesse chuckled. "Only when I'm tired." The first frost came early that year. The mornings turned silver, the grass crunching under boot and hoof alike. Ghostwind's coat thickened, gleaming pale in the weak sunlight. He moved slower now, but there was a steadiness in every step, a quiet grace born of peace. One evening, as Jesse carried a pail of water to the trough, he noticed Ghostwind standing on the hill above the barn. The stallion's head was high, his mane stirring in the cold wind. "Come on, boy," Jesse called. "Supper's waiting." But the horse didn't move. Jesse set the bucket down and walked up the slope. The wind picked up, whistling through the grass. When he reached the top, Ghostwind turned his head, eyes soft. The light of the setting sun caught them, making them look almost human. Jesse laid a hand against the horse's neck. "You thinking about leaving again?" Ghostwind exhaled, long and slow, and rested his muzzle against Jesse's shoulder. Then he pulled back, took one last look at the valley below, and lay down in the grass. At first, Jesse thought he was resting. But then he saw it. The stillness. The kind that belongs to endings, not pauses. He dropped to his knees beside the horse, his hands trembling as they pressed against the warm coat. "No, not yet," he whispered. "You've got more time." But the stallion's breath came shorter, slower. His great chest rose once, twice, then stopped. For a long moment, Jesse couldn't move. The only sound was the wind sweeping over the ridge, tugging at his coat, carrying the smell of hay and frost. May found him there at dusk, sitting beside the horse, the world dimming around them. She said nothing. She simply knelt beside him and took his hand. Together they stayed until the stars appeared, until even grief turned quiet. They buried Ghostwind on the hill overlooking the basin, the same place where he had taken his last breath. Jesse carved a simple marker from oak. Ghostwind. He ran free. He stayed true. When the townsfolk came to pay respects, Jesse spoke few words. "He wasn't just a horse," he said. "He was the part of us that remembers how to trust again." No one in Redwater Basin disagreed. That night, the valley felt strange, emptier, yet lighter somehow. The wind moved through the grass the way it used to when Ghostwind ran there, as if his spirit had simply traded body for air. Winter settled hard that year, but life went on. May's school grew, the ranch thrived, the people stayed, and sometimes, when Jesse walked the ridge at dawn, he could swear he heard hooves echoing faintly in the mist, steady, patient, familiar. He would pause, smile, and whisper, "You're still here, old friend." Then he'd head down to the barn, the wind brushing against him like a promise kept. Spring came again. Wildflowers spread across the valley. The river ran fuller, and the ranch carried a new name, not chosen by Jesse, but by the people who worked it. Ghostwind Ranch. No signboard, no ceremony, just a name spoken quietly, out of respect. May stood beside Jesse as the sun rose over the hills, light spilling gold across the pastures. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "No, we did. Him most of all." The wind stirred then, soft and certain, bending the grass in a slow ripple that rolled toward them. It brushed against Jesse's face, warm and alive. He smiled, tipping his hat to the horizon. "Guess some spirits don't leave. They just change shape." May slipped her arm through his. "Then we'd better make sure the place stays worth haunting." They laughed, the sound mingling with the morning breeze. And somewhere in that wind, faint but sure, was the echo of a hoofbeat, steady, free, and unafraid. The sound drifted across Redwater Basin, through the fences, past the hills, and into forever. And maybe it still rides on the wind tonight. If this story found a place in your heart, drop a 0 or 1 down below, just to let me know you were here listening. It's simple, but it helps more than you think. And if you love stories like this, tales of grit, kindness, and the wild bond between man and horse, make sure you subscribe before you ride out. There's a lot more coming down this dusty trail, and you won't want to miss the next one.